Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Rick Harris and I'm one of the professors here in the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you today Dr. Lisa Taylor-Swanson. I've known Lisa we were just talking about this, I've known her for over 5 years now. She's part of the Society for Acupuncture Research that I'm involved in. But more importantly, she's a researcher from the University of Utah who is coming here to give you guys a lecture. So a little bit about Dr. Swanson. She's a dedicated women's health researcher and licensed acupuncturist who is passionately committed to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion in healthcare for midlife women. As an assistant professor in the College of Nursing at the University of Utah, she works to improve women's health during the menopausal transition, ensuring equitable access to high-quality healthcare that integrates evidence-based biomedical and integrated healthcare approaches. Dr. Taylor-Swanson's pioneering research is rooted in a community-engaged approach that developed Menogap, designed to fill a gap in menopausal women's healthcare. She's currently collaborating with the Latina community health workers on a University of Utah funded IU4U initiative and an American Alaskan Indian Native Women project funded by the University of Utah's Vice President of Research to adapt Menogap to their unique needs. I hope that she may be talking about some of that research today. I'm looking really forward to that. So recognized for her dedication in interdisciplinary research, Dr. Taylor-Swanson received the Excellence of University Health Partnership Award from the Con and earned a nomination to the Society for Acupuncture Research Board of Directors, where she's currently the treasurer of the Society for Acupuncture Research. She was most recently selected as the recipient of the University of Utah's 2023 Leadership in Inclusive Excellence Awards for faculty. Her tireless efforts drive positive change in women's health and promote diversity and inclusivity within the healthcare setting. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lisa Taylor-Swanson today. And the title of her presentation is going to be Community-Based Participatory Research with Minoritized Communities Developing Interventions with and for Menopausal Women. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Rick. I wonder if I can see the time on this laptop.
You mean to notify you when it's certain?
Yeah, just let me give it
How many minutes you want?
Yeah.
You want like
So-
5 minutes or 10 minutes?
Maybe 10 minutes.
10, okay.
And figuring we want maybe 45 minutes total.
Sounds good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks again, Rick. That was a lovely introduction. There is an echo here, Camper. Did you hear that, Rick? When you
I
were
heard an
speaking?
echo.
Yeah.
It might be your computer if you want to turn it down.
How about now? Oh, this is lovely. And I didn't mess anything up, right? It's working. Okay, good. All right, because the speakers are in the room. All the tech things. So again, hello and welcome, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here in California. It got me out of Utah, which is a joy. And speaking of Utah, I do want to start off with an acknowledgement. Where I live in Salt Lake City is the ancestral and traditional homelands of several tribes and now tribal nations. And likewise, here we are in Irvine, it's the ancestral home of several tribes as well and tribal nations. So just acknowledging where we are in place and the place that it has been for millennia for many communities. And also just to acknowledge the important relationships and treaties between nations, and that I do respect those as well. So I actually had several colleagues early in my career say, Lisa, why are you researching menopause? Nobody dies from menopause. Don't you want to do something else? And I said, no, I really want to stick with this. So my first bit of the talk will be, yeah, thank you, ma'am. First bit of the talk will be, why do we care about menopause? Why should we care about menopause? And what do we need to be thinking about? What are the concerns that women are dealing with and their healthcare providers? And then I'll talk a bit about, as Rick had mentioned, the joy of developing these several interventions. I've been calling it Menogap and her babies. So we've got these 3 Menogap interventions. And they've really been developed close to the bone with communities for whom I hope they will serve. It's definitely not a top-down approach. And so within that, I'll be talking about community-based participatory research methods. I've learned a lot along the way, I will say that. So starting off menopause, why do we care? What should we care? And the icon on the left is the stereotypical woman having hot flashes, or if it's at night, night sweats. And it's miserable for one, but if you zone out, that's all right, but don't forget this one key point. This is the first point I'm making, and it's the most critical one, which is vasomotor symptoms, which is the umbrella term, including hot flashes and night sweats, are independently predictive, independently correlated, not causative, but just some association we don't yet understand with heart disease, the #1 killer of women, actually kills more women than all the cancers combined, independently associated, independently correlated with Alzheimer's disease, and also with osteoporosis. So again, as scientists and clinicians, we have a lot of work to do, because again, those kind of peach colored arrows are full of question marks. We don't know what the associations are. There could be moderators or mediators, we don't know, but there's something to sort out. I have some hypotheses, but I won't get into those details. But that's why we should care. One, women are miserable with these symptoms. They are very impactful and burdensome. And there's this whole trajectory of question marks that we don't understand that includes, again, the #1 killer of women in the United States today. So we must do a lot of work in this space. And what's really good is, as I mentioned in the beginning of my career, a colleague said, "Why are you studying this, Lisa? You should pick something more fundable." And, you know, it wasn't bad advice. We have to be strategic in what we're researching. We need to have funding to do the work. But menopause is having a moment. And that's really the case between this news article, between President Biden. This was back in March, which feels like a lifetime ago. So much has happened in the last 5 months. But he put on the map women's health research, thank heavens. And I was so thrilled to see menopause-related conditions at the bottom of this announcement, because at NIH, menopause, even still, is on no one's priority list, not a one. It's not at National Institutes of Aging, Office of Women Research on Women's Health, RWH, not on their agenda either. They do fund menopause research, but again, it's on no one's priority list, but it's going to be there soon because of President Biden. I know, right? We need to do a lot of work. The second most important thing I can tell you today is a little bit more about vasomotor symptoms. And I will say honestly, so I've been 10 years in this journey of studying from my PhD forward vasomotor symptoms and the sequelae therein. And honestly, for years, I myself really just focused on hot flashes and night sweats. Knock on wood, I didn't have any back then, so I didn't even know what I was studying from my own lived experience. But that I could imagine. I had a fever before, that kind of thing. But as I've dug into the literature, I've realized there's so much more that's happening when there's a vasomotor event that's happening. Specifically, women very commonly will feel a sense of palpitations, a sense of anxiety, in addition to the hot flashes and the night sweats. What's interesting is only recently, in the last 10 or so years, is there any research at all looking at the palpitation part of vasomotor symptoms? So the other key thing is that it's not just like for a few days or weeks or months, it is literally years that women are experiencing these frustrating and challenging events during the day and or at night. The average duration of vasomotor symptoms is 7 years. Now just imagine, like if you had debilitating pain for 7 years, you know, that's something you can kind of wrap your head around, but that is what women are living with. And it's every single woman that potentially may experience vasomotor events. So that's another key factor. And stunningly, some of our elders are experiencing vasomotor events in their 60s and 70s. I mean, I kind of giggled because I'm like, this is so unbelievable, but it's the truth. And they can onset typically in our 40s. So if a woman has experienced them for decade after decade, you can only imagine the challenge and the difficulty of those symptoms. The other key thing to know is that most women, a sizable number of women, experience vasomotor symptoms before the cessation of menses. So it's that perimenopausal time, usually in our 40s, when things start to go a bit haywire. And here's a terrific graphic of the haywire. So on the left side, you see premenopause. And if a woman's cycling regularly through her teens, 20s, 30s, every month, that's a 6-month window, you see the same cyclic rhythm. It's pleasant, you kind of know what's coming. But then perimenopause, you know, again, it's not very pleasant. You don't know what's coming. And it's not just estrogen that's all over the place. We tend to hear about estrogen, but progesterone, FSH, and LH. They're variable during any given day and during any given week and month and so on and so forth. So it's very difficult to determine, like, when is my period going to come and when am I going to have a cessation of menses altogether? Because again, there's so much change and variability that's happening during perimenopause. But then the joy of everything is on the right-hand side. We eventually get through this time of transition to postmenopause, and it's a new, stable normal. Women eventually get there. And then the other key thing is I mentioned vasomotor symptoms, but that's just at the bottom of the symptom cluster. VMS is the acronym. So an identified grouping of symptoms that women often experience is pain, either onset or worsening during perimenopause, sleep issues. If you're having hot flashes at night and night sweats, it's hard to sleep, hard to get back to sleep. Anxiety is common, depression is common, so there's this mood dysregulation, and then fuzzy thinking, brain fog, cognitive concerns. What's interesting is that same symptom cluster, pain, sleep, mood, cognition, that actually originated from the oncology literature. So you add vasomotor, and you're here in menopausal literature. You add digestive concerns, you're in the IBS terrain. And actually all those symptoms, except the vasomotor, are witnessed in folks, in our veterans with Gulf War illness. So I like to mention that because it's the same dysregulation we see in the body, plus or minus a couple things in condition after condition. But there's more good news. It's actually bad news. In addition to these various symptom clusters, it's every system in the body potentially can be affected during perimenopause and early postmenopause. Pick a system, there's a potential. Welcome, come on in. Thanks for joining. No, you're fine. So there's a potential for each system of the body to be affected with this endocrine change. So it's so critical to know for each of us as clinicians, we're seeing our patients, for each of us as individuals, whether we're a woman that might experience these some days or a man who has a partner or family member, aunt, mother, you name it, who's going to be experiencing things system-wide in the body. What I hear from patients and participants is women say things like, I feel like I'm losing my mind. I don't recognize myself. This is a terrific quote from Amanda Redmond. She's been in absolute bits at times. Over and over, what I hear women saying is, I feel like I'm going crazy. And so if you know someone who says that and she's in her 40s and up, I would suggest that you affirm she's not going crazy and she'll get through this. And to find somebody, a clinician who knows what's going on at this time of life. And also to note, there's that symptom cluster, and it's all those systems of the body, as I noted, but these are common symptoms, top 40, that women experience during this transition. So pick a symptom. Hair loss is common, facial hair. You have more on your face and less on your head. It's very unfun for most women. Memory, I've talked about bad breath, body odor, clammy feeling. I mean, the list is extensive. So again, women typically don't know that these symptoms could be happening during this time of life and this transition, but they're very common. The other problem is most clinicians don't know what's going on either. So in one survey of OBGYN residents, only a third were trained in menopause medicine or menopause care. So 2/3 got nothing. And a lot of women will present to their OBGYN, what's happening to me? It's about my period, so I should go to this physician, but it's not helpful if they don't have the training. In another survey, only 1/3 of folks one-third of folks answered the questions wrong on a test when they were surveyed, and those were family medicine, internal medicine, and OBGYN. So in another survey of women, 70% of them went for care and didn't get it. And again, it's because providers don't know. Interestingly, for those of us in the integrative space, 50% of women seek care from integrative providers for vasomotor symptoms. So again, the key thing is this gap in care is a massive chasm in our health system. Women are going in for care. They're going to providers who aren't trained. They don't know what to tell them. That's pretty awkward. It's very unpleasant for everyone. And then the symptoms are not being treated. So what do? We've got to do something. And I was thinking, we can do it. We can find a way forward collaboratively. So things got really good for me when a dear colleague moved to the University of Utah, who's a physician and the director of the menopause program. And I was trying to figure out what to do, again, an early career investigator, figuring out my program of research. And I heard about group medical visits. And I thought, well, that's a way to get more women in the room, because again, most women are getting no care or bad care. Long story short, we were able to start this project, and we worked for an entire year to develop Menogap with the Community Advisory Board. And I'll tell you more about that later. But basically what it is 4 weekly sessions. Right now it's in person, but it could certainly be delivered online. And there's a doc talk that's conventional care. So over the 4 weeks, what are vasomotor symptoms? What about pain? What about all these other symptoms? What's the conventional care? So the doc talk would include hormonal therapeutics, non-hormonal medications. And we talk about that whole symptom cluster that I mentioned. And we talk about that cardiovascular disease risk, osteoporosis risk, Alzheimer's disease risk. How do we keep our whole person healthy through this developmental transition? There's also a doc talk from me. Could be anybody, but it's currently me providing the intervention. And so I talk about what's the evidence base on integrative therapeutics. What about herbs? What about acupuncture, acupressure, mindfulness, so on and so forth. And then there's group acupuncture at the end. So it's about a 2-hour visit, billable to medical insurance, and again, 4 weekly sessions. This is a little bit more of the detail about what we do. But I think more than just the details, because the curriculum's there, if anybody's interested, we're open to collaborating, is women have said things, usually in tears, that this is the best care they've ever received in their lives. Because it is. They have 2 providers who are experts on the topic, who care about them, are not saying, oh yeah, like one of my patients, she had menstrual fluid going into her shoes. Her periods were that heavy. She presented to her provider, who said, oh yeah, that happens during perimenopause. Didn't treat her. Sent her, like that's what women are facing in a real life vignette. So for her to come and have, again, 2 providers who are saying, no, that is treatable, you don't need to suffer like that. And after 3 acupuncture treatments, she had a normal period, the first normal period she'd had in 2 years. So she's continuing with acupuncture therapy and was able to manage it without hormone therapy, which was at her discretion and her choice. But having both options was really the key in this group medical visit. So this is where things get really fun, because as I mentioned briefly, we worked with a community advisory board, or CAB, for a year. We met online and presented ideas and asked for their feedback and iteratively developed and refined the Menogap curriculum. And 8 out of 9 wanted to be on papers. And I was like, yes, absolutely. They are experts. And that is a key principle of community-based participatory research. It's, yes, I have a PhD and I've been studying this, but I only have that expertise. And they, of course, have their expertise with their lived experience. And the thing about pubs and manuscripts and posters and talks and all of that, that collaborative work, it reflects their key contribution. None of this could have happened without them. So honestly, when I started this journey, I didn't know, like, you can invite community members to be on a publication, and you totally can. It's obviously, the rules of what merits us enough input for publications are going to vary, but it's really it's about equity. We're all working together, and this is really reflective of that. So we had posters at international and national and local meetings. And, one thing I put a few just like details in here that might be useful if folks are interested in working collaboratively with community members. And a lot of times people say, oh, I'm working with my stakeholders, but there's actually some concern about that being a really unhelpful term. It's rooted in colonizing, basically. And so colonizers would go to a new place and say, oh, it's a new place. I'm going to stake my claim on the land and take it from the indigenous people who have been there for however long. So you might consider instead working with collaborators or partners, local folks, interested parties instead of stakeholders. And likewise, instead of talking about minority communities, the word that might be a little more respectful to consider is minoritized. It's a process that happens socially. It's not that there's some endemic or inside thing that's fixed that they are a minority. It's a social construct. And then this is a framework that might be useful if you want to get into the details of community-based research from Diverka and colleagues. And I'm going to go through it in a few pieces and talk about how we've used this in our work. So in types of evidence, there's definitely different values community members have versus researchers. We need to get pubs and grants and things, and that doesn't really matter to them. So we have different values and priorities and different experiences for sure. And different approaches to deciding what kind of data is really relevant. We've collected both quantitative and qualitative data from our community advisory board, and then also in the pilot work we've done. to really hear their perspectives of what matters to them, as well as figuring out what's in the literature and what's, statistically and clinically relevant and all of that. And then also there's a way to move forward. I just want to highlight the next box in the center there, decisions. So I'm currently writing a grant for a mechanism at NIH to improve Native American health. It's the IRENA. It's kind of like Backpack for Pain, and it's IRENA for Native American health. And one thing that we're writing in our grant, it's an R34, is for tribal community members, tribal leaders, and also clinical leaders in a tribal clinic to define what are the useful outcomes. Because me as the scientist, I'm like, oh, we should use this validated scale, and this is the for primary outcome, what we usually do, which is legitimate in that sense, but it's not potentially relevant. We'll find out from our community members, I almost said that, what is an important, most essential outcome for them. So it may or may not be vasomotor, blah, blah, blah. It might be, can I be nice with my family and not break into tears, or, whatever. It will be for the community members to decide. But it's that level of true partnership that I think is really essential. Again, they're experts. I'm just trying to, sort of like a midwife, I'm trying to help birth the baby of the research. I'm trying to be an ally, and their expertise is essential. So a little bit more detail in terms of working with the Community Advisory Board. And again, this has been such a fun journey because I knew none of this when I was a PhD student and have just learned along the way from my colleagues. And so as we worked with the Community Advisory Board to develop Menogap, we had a focus group. We asked, what do you think about menopause? What do you think about these symptoms? It was the very first meeting that we had. So we transcribed it, or rather we audio recorded. No, come on in, feel free. Oh, okay, wrong room. We audio recorded it, we transcribed it, we analyzed it like usual, but then we had a return of results and we said, wait, did this make sense? What did you think about the conversation? What did we miss? And then we asked them to do data analysis, basically, in several ways that might work for them. So if they like to read through the minutia of the transcripts and do thematic analysis like we did, then that was one option. And then we also took notes. My research assistant made this awesome diagram that basically was a thematic analysis on the fly. So what did we talk about? What were some of the details? And so if they were more of a visual learner, they could look at that and say, oh yeah, that pretty much covered what I took away from that conversation as well. Or, oh no, there was information that I think was missing. So again, their expertise is valued at every level. So again, next steps in terms of these various projects, we really want to be sure and adapt these interventions, again, with and for various communities, because not every woman is the same, obviously, in terms of what not only her symptom experience will be, but risks. So Black and Hispanic women have much higher risk of vasomotor symptoms and for longer duration. In fact, Asian American women, it's 4.7 years, 4.8 years of vasomotor experiences, and Black women, it's 10 years. It's double the average of vasomotor experience. So there's got to be information that's shared, and also cardiovascular disease risks vary greatly, much more so among BIPOC women compared to white women. So again, really sorting out what community processes matter to them, what attitudes and knowledge are really central. The cultural norms really need to be taken into account, again, when designing and conducting research as well. And the communication is key. That's the only way that things move forward. And one of my collaborators, she said, Lisa, in our Indigenous communities, research moves at the pace of trust. And without trust, it goes nowhere. And that, of course, takes time. And it's been 3 years where we've had meetings and conversations and going back and forth and pilot testing. And they said, yep, okay, this is okay. We're going to move forward. And so we're, again, writing this grant to submit to NIH, but it's only moved at that pace of trust. And I will say, as an early stage investigator, maybe I should have listened to that colleague who was like, why are you going to study menopause? And she probably would have said, don't do it with Indigenous communities because it's going to tank your career. It's so slow to get things done. But I just didn't listen to those opinions because it wasn't right for my North Star, my personal compass. And then I just got lots of other things published and made sure I could keep things moving forward. And then in addition to communication, really showing up in person at community fairs and events, really being transparent and accessible is essential. So one way that we built that trust was not only with communication, but with having food and flu, back to the school booths at the community events. So we could answer questions about, menopausal symptoms. And what I heard from community members at those events, when the moms would come get the backpack for the kid and that sort of thing, like, oh yeah, I'm really glad for this information, but can you help my husband? Like, he's worried about me. Or the husbands would come get the backpack and say, oh my gosh, my wife, how do I help her? It's a whole family phenomenon. And very often I would hear not only that, but the moms would say, can I bring my daughter to these events? Like, I want her to learn this now. She's a teenager or 20-something versus later. So again, these engagement opportunities were essential. One of our community advisory board members during the pandemic said, well, Lisa, my church sisters, like, they need help. Can you come to our church online? And so we had a workshop online that was Menogap just for the church ladies. And that was a way to go where it worked for the community, which is always the right way. And then actually one of our community advisory board members is a leader in the Pacific Islander community in Salt Lake. And she said, hey, why don't you bring some flyers to the high school? They have like an extra party for the Polynesian kids because the families are there. So it's just a way to show up. And it's easy to think, what does the high school graduation ceremony have to do with menopause? But again, it's a way to meet the community where they're at and have some fun. So these are the slides, and I have to say, I just think they're beautiful because people are beautiful, right? And so on the left, that's Waning Moon, what we've adapted with and for Indigenous women. And then on the right, Mujeres en Menopausia, that's what we've adapted with and for Hispanic and Latino women. So a little bit more about that, I've mentioned briefly, but I've been working for these 3 years with the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake. And one key thing is, I think, Rick, you mentioned you're interested in potentially working with Indigenous communities. It's very different what's needed, whether in an urban setting or in a tribal setting, which tends to be rural or even frontier. So that's one first consideration. But what's really fun, I'm actually going to go forward, is just to show you our team. And so we have researchers, we have clinician researchers, we have Hispanic women, we have Indigenous women, we have white women, undergrads, PhD, nurse midwife. I mean, it's really a diverse team in terms of lived experience and background. What was absolutely delightful and completely new for me was the idea of indigenizing the content. And so we worked with the Community Advisory Board of Indigenous Women, and they were like, we want ceremony. We want to be in a circle. Like, this is how we talk. We want to smudge with sweetgrass. We want a medicine man or medicine woman. But more than that, because those are critical things, but it was like, we think of health, actually it's pretty congruent with integrative health, as body, mind, spirit, and emotions. And I was like, oh, I got you. Like, we can just talk shop pretty easily. But that isn't conventional care so much. And so they call it two-eyed seeing, Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and conventional white, colonizing, whatever, ways of knowing and being. Very, very different worldviews. And so we really tried to be in this place that was holding both of those. So we need to have the conventional medicine, like safety first. If you've got hypertension, let's talk about that. But also, because we were moving at the pace of trust, the Community Advisory Board, we met over 4 months. The very first night, one woman, for example, said, oh yeah, I have hypertension, but I'm not taking that white man's medicine. I don't actually care. If it's going to harm my life or shorten my lifespan, like, that is not for me. And we said, we hear you, that we understand and respect that opinion. And over time, as we talked more about conventional care options, integrative options, natural medicine is actually the word that everybody likes and makes sense to them, because it's usually like their family medicine that's natural. So over time, we built that trust. And by the 4th month, she told the nurse on our team, actually, I want to come in and see you next week. Let's talk about hypertension medications, because I've tried doing this natural stuff. It's a little better, but not much. And so again, that was an example of where the starting point was no, absolutely no thank you on the conventional care. But there was more trust that was built, even with the nurse that she knew from the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake and she'd seen regularly. So it was really exciting in not just like talk, but in lived experience for participants that was meaningful, and for those of us who are outside the Indigenous community as well. The other thing I'll say, that last bullet point, so little is known about Indigenous women's experiences of peri and postmenopause. We conducted a scoping review. And the scoping review is like gray literature, scientific literature, everything. There's 37 items from, like, we searched 6,000. So 37 things that are either scientific or non-scientific written about Indigenous women's menopause experiences. And the study of women across the nation, the SWAN study, was designed specifically to learn about BIPOC women's experiences, Black, Indigenous people of color. There's no Indigenous women in that study. They just left the I out of BIPOC, and Indigenous women are not in the study that's designed to learn about BIPOC individuals. It's like that chasm of a lack of our knowledge. It's really stunning. So again, I just think the images are beautiful because the communities and the chi, the energy of it is there, I think, in this intervention. So again, what does it mean to indigenize the waning moon? It was very much about listening and respect and hearing one another in as genuine way as we could. And we're all mortal and have times when we're not at our peak form, but we really just tried to be present and hear what was being said and figure out how we could meet those needs and opinions. And again, it's a true partnership. And actually, I learned this word, quadrumvirate. We have 4 of us who are PIs. I'm technically the PI, but 3 other of my colleagues who are all clinician scientists, 2 are clinician scientists, 1's a PhD, but the 4 of us run the study together. And it's terrific because, everybody's got their strengths and challenges, and together we really keep it moving forward. And so that's been a really novel experience to figure out how do we keep our communication lines open and run it together. Hit the button by mistake. The other thing that I didn't mention is that, because I mentioned ceremony, being in a circle, they also said, well, Black cohosh, that's great. It's evidenced for vasomotor symptoms. It's been used for hundreds of years, according to the literature, by Indigenous women. I think it's been used for thousands of years, because that's the case here. It's also used in Chinese herbal medicine, Shangma, for millennia as well. But we were like, we can go a step further. Instead of like talk, here's a slide about Shangma, the participants, we were able to buy seeds. Here's seeds, grow your own plants at home. Some women were like, well, I don't even have a garden. I live in an apartment. So we found collapsible pots that expand and contract, gave them a bag of dirt. And it was like literally power to the people. Grow your own medicine. Here's how you harvest it and that kind of thing. And we had an Indigenous woman who's an herbalist join the team so she could teach us all that. So it's just like having our best time, I think, as scientists. It's been pretty amazing. The other thing about collaborating with Indigenous communities, if anyone is interested and hasn't already, there's a whole line of ethics review that's additional to the typical review. So for our teeny little pilot study, we first had the typical University of Utah IRB approval. That was no problem. Then that went to the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake, to the board of directors, and it took a couple months to get on their agenda. That was no problem. Then it went to the Indian Health Service, and the IHS only meets at whatever intervals. And unfortunately, they had a change in personnel, and it took us an entire year. 1 year. So again, as a junior researcher, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to kill my career. But it was 1 year from the start with the University of Utah IRB to the IHS approval, and then we could start. And so the intramural funds were only for 1 year, and I was able to justify our extension for that reason. But the fun does not stop there, because every single manuscript goes to the IHS IRB. Every single conference abstract goes to the IHS IRB. So it just has to be factored into your schedule. I'm kind of guilty of getting conference abstracts to the conference like the day they're due or the day before. That will not work in this case because you need to have it done several months in advance to go to the IHS. And I have at the bottom, like, does anybody know why those additional levels of ethics are required? Any ideas? It's the Yeah, exactly. Additional protection because of the serious harm that's been inflicted on Indigenous communities by researchers. It's horrid. And so we, have to have, of course, these extra protections. And as I mentioned, research moves at the pace of trust because of those experiences, and especially health research when, again, if Indigenous individuals are like, I don't really want to take pharmaceuticals. So, And there's this research history that I know in my community, we were harmed. Like, why would I participate in your health sciences research? There's like a double no thank you. So it's a really important history to know. And then of course, just always coming with humility because that's what's requisite. So Menogap is, again, a dual delivered, clinician-delivered intervention, billable medical visit. And one of our community advisory board members said, well, in my community, a lot of people don't have health insurance. Like, they can't even go to Menogap. Why am I helping you develop this thing that my community cannot receive benefit from? And I said, well, let's fix that. And so she's a community health worker and taught me all about her amazing profession. And so we've adapted the Menogap curriculum with her and with other colleagues who are Hispanic. And I'm not bilingual, but they are. And so the intervention is all in Spanish, but more critically, it's the correct level of content that a community health worker can deliver. So it's health education, self-care education, just like in Menogap, but with less of the jargon that the physician colleague and myself might use if we were providing that education. And then critically, they have all the community networks in place so they can say, okay, you can go to this clinic and receive good medical care. Our next step is going to be, we've got to go train the clinicians because, again, most clinicians aren't trained in menopause medicine. But what's nice is the English version will be added to the community health worker library in the state of Utah, so any community health worker can take this training. And then we've got a few folks who are in non-Hispanic communities that would like to personalize and tailor the curriculum for their communities. So I think that'll be ongoing. But our first step with our community health worker who is Hispanic is to have a train the trainer event. So it'll be the 4 weekly Mujeres en Menopausal sessions, and she'll teach that content to other CHWs, community health workers who are Spanish speaking, and then get their feedback, what worked, what didn't work, and then we'll revise the intervention. And then after that, set it loose and see where it goes. So that's our work with Mujeres en Menopausal. I have family in Puerto Rico and was able to go visit family and also develop some connections with colleagues in the College of Nursing at University of Puerto Rico. And long story short, for any individual who's going through breast or other gynecologic cancers, she, depending upon the type of cancer, very likely could have an instant menopause. It's either surgically or chemotherapeutically induced. It is miserable, even when the ovaries are intact. Sadly, women are typically told, oh, you'll be okay, your ovaries are intact. No, that's typically not the case. And so we're working with colleagues in Puerto Rico to adapt Mujeres en Menopausal for women in cancer treatment, either active treatment or in survivorship. Because again, it's usually those vasomotor symptoms on overdrive. It's very difficult. So our work with them is just getting the team going, building trust. They will be conducting some focus groups with cancer survivors on the island and try to sort out what their needs are and what are their concerns. There's very little known about Puerto Rican women's experiences through menopause, in particular the cancer, the oncology setting. So I hope I've convinced everybody online and in the room, menopause matters. It's not just about symptoms that are fleeting or minor. For many women, it's a very serious symptom burden, and definitely a time of transition that can be more than just one symptom, but I hope that I indicated it's this whole woman, this whole person transition. The thing I didn't put actually in my slide deck that was really remiss is it's not all bad, actually, because, think about when you went through puberty. There's some good things that happen. You become an adult, you become mature in these various ways, and all these cool things happen with your body. And for a woman, once she does get to that stable postmenopause where hormones are stable and symptoms are stable, the gift of this time is becoming an elder, becoming a matriarch, becoming wise or more proficient in your career, being the elder in the family, depending upon what's relevant for each woman. And it's not just like being a Pollyanna. I mean, our world leaders tend to be older women. And that's when you can really come into your prime. So I hope to indicate menopause matters. These symptoms are serious, but it's not all bad. And I think that the community voices, it's not just, oh, we need to listen to the community, but of course, these are the people we're serving. They've got to be at the center of our interventions and leading things. And we can do this work in ways that are scientifically rigorous. We're meeting the criteria. You know, it's not just fluffy, basically, but it's ethical and meaningful both to community colleagues and hopefully to ourselves as well. So with that, I think together we can do great things, and I'd love to take any questions if there are any. Thanks, Maximo.
There was a request in the chat or in the Q&A asking to share the slide with the impact of menopause on all the systems again.
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I didn't even cover any of those details. Head to toe. I put that together, and there's no references because I was looking in so many different places. But I basically just wrote all the systems of the body in a list and looked up symptoms and experiences and determined, yeah, that's definitely the whole person. Any particular question that they had a certain system or? Yeah. Check it out. I just had a conversation with a colleague who's a pulmonology nurse expert, and we're starting an acupuncture study, acupuncture pressure, patients with interstitial lung disease, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and other ILDs. Deadly. IPF, people 6 years after diagnosis, it's horrible. Their breathing is so restricted that there's anxiety with that dyspnea. Of course, we're all anxious when we can't breathe well. And so patients will get to choose either acupressure they learn to do for themselves, or I'll needle them with acupuncture. Long story short, her running hypothesis is that most of those diseases are primarily women, and they're primarily postmenopausal. So, you know, that arrow thing I was showing with vasomotor disease symptoms, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's, I think there's a fourth arrow to inflammatory lung disease, ILDs. All four of those are inflammatory conditions of the body, and vasomotor symptoms are an inflammatory process in the body as well. It's sympathetically triggered. So there's a lot to do. And all that is to say, the respiratory, that seems like the most obscure thing, like what the heck does that have to do with menopause? Those ideas just came together in this conversation yesterday with my colleague, and I'm still processing it. So I don't know if that gave them time to add if they had additional questions. Oh.
You provide educational sessions to acupuncturists to treat menopausal patients using protocols that are most effective.
Oh, yes. Join White Pine Circle, whitepincircle.com. It's free to join the discussion groups. Claudia Sitkovitz and we co-lead the menopause group there. We meet every month. I'm going to take Menagap on the road, and I've been working on training for acupuncturists because we don't get this training either. So what in the heck's happening, for how long, blah, blah, blah. And so acupuncturists can deliver this educational curriculum themselves. And then what's the Chinese medicine part of it? So, and actually I'm teaching in Massachusetts in October. They can just email me, then that's for acupuncturists. She's welcome. You're welcome.
Could you share your email again?
Oh, sure.
As well?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to make everybody dizzy. Any other questions while I'm flipping through slides?
We didn't discuss food. I'm in the heat of many different parts of what you shared today. And I'm my N of one, so I'm in quite a clinical mode of, I'm not a clinician, but I'm really examining every dimension of what I do with my 24 hours in order to be able to sleep.
Yes.
My sleep is where everything is recovering from.
Yeah.
And so food has been a major part of what I've needed to shift.
Yeah.
And still on that process. I wouldn't say I'm bulletproof yet, but I've, along with working with my doctor with HRT, I'm now more stable. But I know right now, if I eat in an irregular way for my particular disposition at this time, I will create these spikes in my blood sugar.
There you go.
So yes, I just wondered what your thoughts were, what you've been uncovering, although you didn't really talk about it today.
Yeah, oh, I appreciate that question. And also do email me, because there's a
Yeah.
lot more that I can say than in this moment. But Menogap does have curricula quite a bit regarding a food as medicine, and both foods to eat and foods to avoid. And you're right about blood sugar. That's really key. You want to keep stable blood sugar, because when you do have those spikes, usually is when you'll have a vasomotor event. So that's key. And then there's foods that are known that you need to, for most women, it's a trigger. So to avoid alcohol, spicy food, coffee, those are the biggest triggers. What else would I say? But we do actually cover quite a bit in the Menogap, because the MIND diet is an adaptation of the Mediterranean diet that's good for our brain health. So just thinking about if I'm at risk for Alzheimer's disease, that might be something I consider. And we talk about Mediterranean diet in general, and then various minerals and foods, and for various reasons. So yeah, but email me. I'd be happy to talk more and to share slides.
Excited to do more. And also, the research framework that you've generated, it's so valuable for integrative health institutes that are doing work with communities. And I'm not in the medical field, I'm in the arts, but I do work with ancestral peoples in West Africa, and I have done some work with Indigenous communities in Australia. And that the sort of assumptions that we make, the way in which we get to examine them again is really quite refreshing. And so we get to kind of, in some ways, come to research in a new way. So I was just really thrilled to sense that although this wasn't the stuff that you had to do to get your tenure through or whatever, that this was your passion project and how you developed as a researcher subsequently. Sharing more.
Oh, I appreciate that. Well, I mean, one thing that has been eye-opening is, as I think the first part of your comment was, again, different communities have different needs, and working with the Urban Indian Center of Salt Lake Community Advisory Board, women said, can we bring our grandkids? Because I'm mom basically for my grandkids, and the central nature of her matriarchal, actually it's one of our themes in our paper, is the matriarchal duties, really are such that she didn't have time for her own health and well-being, and not going for health checks at all. So that's a little bit different than my lived experience. And so I was really eager to hear what was needed and what would make it feasible for her to participate, and doable and workable within the family unit, which was essential. I guess just saying, for example, when my Hispanic community health worker colleague invited me to a community event, there's this new clinic in Salt Lake called Vamos Health, and it's this cool model. It's $60 a month. You can get as many doctor visits as you need, or nurse practitioner, your basic lab work. It's good healthcare for uninsured individuals, Spanish and English. So I went and I took my friend a plant in the car. I was excited for her. She had a new job at this clinic, and it was a new clinic opening. The whole parking lot was full. There were 10 bouncy houses, and they had horchata and music, and I just started crying. It was so powerful, because I'm an outsider. That was not my community, but I was so grateful to see, what am I even trying to say? There were people I knew from various settings, and they welcomed me as a part of the community, I guess is really what it was. But to see life is being lived, and good things are happening, and yet in the middle of it, I probably could have counted how many menopausal women are out in the 100-degree heat, miserable, so it's still clinically relevant, but to be connected and woven in meaningful ways, that's what I'm trying to get to. Who thinks science is about that? Usually it's I'm a, white coat, stuffy, blah, blah, professional, which I am. I have to wear that hat too, but being alive and knowing that the work has made such a difference in this teeny little work we've only done in a few years, where women have again wept and said, can we just keep coming back? This is the best care we've ever received. Why are you doing 4 weeks? So I don't know if I'm at time.
10 minutes.
Okay, great.
I could
Didn't
keep
wanna
talking to you.
And I'd love to hear other people's questions or
I have
thoughts, reflections.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm curious in your work if you're looking at personal or individual differences as far as etiology. So, obviously women experience different range of symptoms, and part of that may be due to metabolic differences. And are you accounting for that, or does that have a place to play, a role to play in your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. At present, it doesn't have a role. There's no exclusion criteria or inclusion criteria either way. It's definitely very broad. But I think that's the gift of the group medical visit part, because then with time, either my physician colleague or myself, or when it's ideally other people providing the intervention, not us, they can sort out for this particular woman, what is her, like you say, etiology, and where do things need to go. I think the strength of Menogap and the various babies, so to speak, is that there's so much content. NIH doesn't like it. They're always critiquing me. You have too much in there, Lisa. What does what? But there's healthcare, there's diet information, there's pharmaceutical information, both hormonal, non-hormonal. There's herbal information, there's mindfulness meditation, there's acupressure and puncture. And so sorting out for each woman, like what's happening in her body, that's when it can be individualized and tailored in terms of the therapeutics. So I think that's the strength, but yeah, there's no inclusion or exclusion criteria in terms of if they have metabolic syndrome or they don't, because really there's enough, I think, content to meet most women's needs. That's my hope. Thanks.
Yep, excellent presentation. Question for you, when you brought up the different years of vasomotor symptoms between different racial ethnic groups.
Yep.
Do you think that is more biological, or do you think that is contributed by the health disparity among these groups?
Such a good question. It's both. So for example, what's in the literature, to go a few steps back, so a real controversy for the last 10 or so, 20 years has been phytoestrogens. Estrogens, are they safe, are they not? And what the latest meta-analysis shows, and it was like 20,000 people, it's massive, is that women in Asia, and we've known for a long time, women in Asia have way better symptoms and way fewer, or even sometimes no vasomotor symptoms. But what was found was that having little bits of soy every day from like birth, or, not birth, but childhood through midlife was really quite protective. And even in cancer settings, women were less likely to have a recurrence of cancer that were estrogen receptor positive if they had a lifelong history of phytoestrogens, tofu and soy in particular. So there's that I think is really key. Then if you look at here in the States, allostatic load, which is like chronic stress that we deal with, that's much worse for our BIPOC community. So constant vigilance and hypervigilance and racism and risk. I mean, I just can't fathom, being terrified for my life if I got pulled over by the police officer, which is not the case for me as a white woman, but it is for BIPOC folks. So allostatic load is a very clearly documented factor in terms of worse vasomotor and other symptoms for sure. So I think it's a bit of everything in terms of how we live our lives, choices we make for our self-care, what's culturally relevant and the way I was raised, and then again, the social factors that we deal with. There's not as much literature, I can't really think of anything per se in terms of genetic research, and if I have this gene, I'm more likely to have severe vasomotor symptoms. It's probably out there, but it's not something I read, and it hasn't come my way, I will say that, and I read literature a lot.
I think we're seeing epigenetic variations, and that information will come out eventually. And also, there's a lot of microbiome research now looking at estrogen metabolism.
Yes, that's really key. Yeah, absolutely. And the gut-brain axis and all the rest, and looking at our endocrine system in respect there as well. Yeah.
If we were to transplant a woman from Asia into the United States and expose them to the standard American diet, then instead of the 4.7 years, do we see that get longer?
I would hypothesize that for sure, and everything else. The thing I didn't even touch on is, that whole arrow of vasomotor to cardiovascular disease. It's really about that whole cardiometabolic creep. So there's a concern about weight gain, there's a concern about metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, that whole deal. And that's exactly where she's likely to land if she's eating the standard American diet. It's very sad. Yeah.
You just reinforced my tofu consumption.
Excellent.
I will share that with other.
Yes.
members.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been very interesting, and there's a ton of research, like we always do in science. So of course, we eat food and we see good results. What we tend to research are soy isoflavones, and the literature on that is quite profound, and it's very helpful for vasomotor symptom management. You know. It's like Chinese herbal medicine, you know, like we cook this amazing herbal soup, but what do we research? Like, oh, this little particle, part, chemical, whatever, derivative, and that's science.
I also experienced something last year. I'm sort of like 5 years, I guess, post-menopausal, right? And I experienced a really heavy crash in my system about summer last year. And it was fatigue was one of the main things, cognitive function, sociability, everything just felt like I could just perform my work, and that was about it. And that was in July. And I was mostly on the East Coast. I was here and then on the East Coast. And hot night sweats, hot flashes. And then I knew I was going to Ghana, and I thought, I'm just going to suffer more because there's no air conditioning. But my body adjusted. I actually came home feeling better than when I left. And so, you know, being of African descent, you know, many generations past, I again wonder, you know, I have a heterozygous B blood type, which means I resist malaria. So, you know, I've got, you know, that African piece is still very alive within me. So I don't take malaria tablets, for example. So yeah, my metabolism sort of had some kind of normalizing there. You know, only to 8 months later have that same crash, which I'm now dealing with in other ways. But yeah, it's just fascinating.
It is fascinating. Again,
And I'm going to get to that wisdom place.
I wonder if it was the allostatic load. Like, was it less stressful being there
Not so much. There's a lot of stress in the city, in our
for
crowd.
you, though, specifically?
Yeah, there's a lot of stress, a lot of traffic, a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Cross that one.
I hope you get to go back to Ghana soon and enjoy being there.
Oh, I'm here. I'm now not doing any work. I've decided to have a first summer off. Wisdom.
Wisdom, yeah.
Wisdom.
So thank you very much for coming to the presentation, and thank you so much, Dr. Taylor-Swanson, for your very insightful talk. You had a lot of comments. A lot of people online were having questions, so please do reach out to her via email,
Yeah.
and she'd be more than happy to assist you with any questions that you might have. And please attend us for our next talk, which we're going to have. I don't know, when's our next talk? Do you know, Kemba? I'll put Kemba on the spot. Let's make it. Well, keep an eye out. We're going to have more of these in the coming future. So.
I think it's actually MRA in October.
Oh, so October or so? Okay. Thank you very much. Take care.
It's mine.
Thank you.
It's autumn. October.